Thank you for coming. My name's Mike. I'm an addict, alcoholic. I'll say that. Keep it a little bit of tradition going, even though, as Mr. or not Mr. England today, but we were told it was, yeah, not AA or NA, but sod it. I'll chuck that in there. This is interesting for me today, actually, because I've just started talking to a psychologist again for the first time in a very long time, and there's a few things I've spoken about to people on Dopey and just friends I've made over the last sort of couple of years that about my past that are sort of connecting now, because maybe, I don't know, last times I was sort of in any attempts at recovery, I guess I just wasn't ready to look back or think about these things and sort of make any relevant connections. So yeah, I'll try and chuck a bit of that in because it's hopefully some sort of stuff that people can maybe relate to. I'll see how I go. So I was born in South London in the mid 80s. Sort of very normal family, working class. My old man's a builder. Mum worked as a secretary and then was a housewife after I came along. We lived in a council flat, but it was a flat that they'd managed to buy in Annerley, which is kind of near where Crystal Palace play football. It's sort of Penge, Norwood sort of way. And yeah, just real normal sort of working class upbringing. Happy, you know. Wasn't spoiled, but I wasn't sort of, you know, could go without, just normal childhood. When my sister was born, I was 4, and Mum had a real rough time when my sister was born. There was a problem. I forget what it was now, but she hemorrhaged really badly, and she nearly died. So she was rushed back in the hospital. A couple of days later, and this, I don't really remember it now, but I think it made something of an impression because I remember a couple of years later I started not wanting to go to school. I was always like quite good at school, you know. I was competent sort of student, even quite young, but I just started kicking up a fuss about going into school, and I imagine I had this fear it was going to happen again. Basically, I was going to come home and my mum wouldn't be there. So I thought, well, if I don't go to school, I can check she's okay, sort of thing. And this went on and off and off and on. And I was sort of taken to doctors and diagnosed with school phobia and childhood depression and all manner of other sort of things. And I was actually chucked on antidepressants quite young because I had problems sleeping. By the time I was about 10, I just wasn't sleeping at all. So this was, yeah, it's sort of off and on, but it obviously, yeah, made an impression. Couple years later, I got expelled from a school. I was in my early teens, and I was just refusing to go in, and I had a panic attack. I actually ended up, I hit a teacher, and this ended up in me. Well, I wasn't expelled, but I was asked to leave, so to speak. And Mum and Dad started putting me in these programs that I'd had some connection with prior, which was like outdoor pursuits, you know, positive release of energy, you know, rock climbing, hiking, you know, nature watching, all this sort of thing. And I remember I asked to go on a camp, and one of the guys who led the camp was someone who Mum and Dad had sort of known on and off. You know, it wasn't a close friend or anything, but they'd known him through these things that were connected to the school. And I remember I literally begged her to let me go. She didn't want me to go because it was a long way away. It was up in the lake. No, sorry, it was in Snowdonia, up in North Wales. And I didn't. She didn't want to let me go by myself, and I talked her into it. And this is something that's come back to bite me in the ass as well, because she didn't want to let me go, but she ended up relenting, and I went. And on this trip, myself and a couple of other boys were sexually abused by this guy, and it wasn't sort of, sort of how much detail to go, but I mean, it wasn't extreme, but it was certainly very, very much, yeah, sexual abuse. And I think one of the other lads maybe suffered slightly worse than I. But anyway, so we came back, and I had no idea sort of how to process this information, sort of what had happened, and I just sort of rebelled further. And I didn't tell mum and dad about what had happened because I was desperately afraid of them feeling guilty. I did not want them to beat themselves up over it because I was the one that had talked them into letting me go. So I never said anything. And then about 9 months later, I went on another one of these things, and the same thing happened again. And that's a big one. Obviously, I sort of go, what the fuck was I thinking? You know, why did I go again? And to this day, I don't really know, but I did. And yeah, and it happened again. So, and again, I said nothing. Ended up back home, kicking off at school, and by this point, it's got quite bad, you know. So, mum managed to get me some funding to go to a private school for kids who had been chucked out of mainstream education, and excuse me, and it was a good school. It was an interesting school. It was on the grounds of a big place in Sevenoaks, and it was actually Princess Diana's original boarding school. It was huge old Victorian buildings, and they did all sorts of cool stuff there. And it was a really, really good school. But I never opened up about what happened to me. I just blamed my problems on insomnia and the trauma of my mum nearly dying when my sister was born. I left out everything else. And I got sent away a couple of times for a few weeks to like psychological assessment at this sort of child and adolescent psychiatric unit, and assessed and come back. And I did good with the grades at school. I was the oldest in my year. I got skipped ahead. Skipped ahead a year and did my GCSEs early. But I was so restless. I was determined to leave school as soon as I could. I enjoyed learning, but I hated school. So, but while I was there, I met a couple of guys who became really close friends, and we were sort of 15, 16 by this point. And like, well, why don't we leave school and, you know, as soon as we can, 16, and try and start our own little business? We don't, you know, neither of us wanted to go to uni, and neither of us really had any, you know, intentions of like just stocking, you know, we'd done the part-time jobs in McDonald's or stacking shelves or whatever, and just wanted something different, you know. So we set up a little window cleaning business, and I'd already done quite a lot of work with my dad, who's a carpenter. When I refused to go to school, he'd take me to work. So I spent quite a lot of time working on sort of carpentry and joinery stuff. So we set up this little business. We bought a window cleaning and maintenance round, and off we went, cleaning windows and fixing things up, and got to know a couple of other guys in the area who were involved in that. One who I got to know quite well, and I didn't realise at the time, but he was a drug addict, an alcoholic. I didn't realise this till a couple of years later, but anyway, so we got involved in all that. And then Adam found this flat. He wanted to go out and rent an apartment flat, you know, and him and another mate, and they needed a third person to go in. But I couldn't do it at the time. I was still living with mum and dad, and it just wasn't. Yeah, I think they were a year older than me too, and I think I couldn't really do it. Anyway, so they got on. He'd been working part-time with another fellow who was a forklift driver who was a bit older, and he took the third room, and they all became good mates, and I became good mates as well with him through, because I was always, even though I didn't live there, I was like the fourth resident, you know, as the four of us were just always there knocking around. And the party drugs sort of thing we started that quite early. I remember doing smoking weed and sniffing poppers, amyl nitrate on the school grounds at school. Any excuse to get out. Smoking cigarettes was the first one. We were smoking fags by the time we was 12, 13, and then progressed on to smoking weed and sniffing poppers in the gardens and under the rhododendron bushes in school. And then a couple of years later, I was always quite big for my age. I'm sort of 6'3", and I was shaving quite young, so I was always able to get into off licenses and get served and get into pubs young and this sort of thing, and just knocking around with an older crowd as well. So the party drugs come in, the speed and the ecstasy and this sort of thing. And it was good. It was good. It was good times. It was fun. Now, this other fella, Rob, in the flat, what I didn't know at the time was he was actually a heroin addict in recovery. His mum had passed away very young from cancer. And he told me about that. And obviously, my mum had nearly died, and it was a point of reference, understanding, and then I came around the flat one day, and Rob was the only one there, and he was it was the anniversary of his mum's death, and he was smoking this stuff on tinfoil, and I said, oh, what's that? He said, oh, it's opium. It wasn't, it was heroin, but he said it was opium, and I was like, oh, I've got to try that. He's like, no, fuck off, because I was like, I was only just 17, I think, and he was probably 25 or 26. Anyway, he's like, no, fuck off, no way. Anyway, I talked him into it, and he ran it for me, blah blah blah, and I was just absolutely trolleyed off it, and I went down the pub with him after to meet the other two lads, and they were really worried about me because I'm literally like trying to drink the beer and my head's like dunk on the table fucking every sort of 30 seconds, and they're freaking out, and I was just oblivious to their concern. Like, they were genuinely concerned. I'm like, this is just how I need to be now. This is great. So it was that classic fucking I have arrived moment so many people speak of, and I just pursued it from there on. That was his relapse. I mean, I say his. I think he'd probably been going for a couple of weeks already, but so I just kind of tagged along with him. He was cool, He was a musician. He was a clever bloke. He was just one of these people that he never pushed it on me, But he was obviously for a 17-year-old. It was cool, hanging out with the big boys, and he knew some cool people, some interesting people. So that sort of went from there. And I obviously started becoming a bit more distant, I guess, from my parents. Still living in their loft. By this point, they'd moved down out of London. We were living in Kent, little town, Tunbridge, sort of. I don't know, some of you might know it. Medway Towns, southeast in Kent, about 20 miles south of London. But yeah, so I just pursued the drugs from there on. And I remember looking online back. This would have been like, I don't know, like around 2000-ish, very, very early 2000s. And I remember looking on these websites, and this is something that sort of I've thought about recently for the first time. I was talking to this psychologist, and I remember looking at these websites about addiction, and stories of addiction, and people who had gone down these avenues, and I was just captivated. And I wasn't physically addicted to anything myself. And my mum was starting to ask questions by this point. And I remember sort of toying with the idea of telling her that I didn't feel right unless I was adding something to me. But I never really did at that stage. I never really told her. I sort of flitted around the edge, and I mean, she must have known I was quote unquote experimenting, But so it sort of progressed from there, really. And I was just, yeah, to the point where I was chasing it. And if you're chasing it like that and you're using it every day, it's obviously it's only going to end one way. And it did. And I had a habit before I started injecting. I remember the first time I actually remember going into withdrawal was after I finally told my mum and dad. I said I have a drug problem, and they were very naive to it at the time. It wasn't a world they knew anything about. And I said, look, I'm just going to stay home for a few days and go to bed, sort of thing, and get it out of my system, you know. Because I was obviously pretty naive to it too. So I tried it. I think I lasted about 36 hours. And I remember I was lying in the bath, in a hot bath, and I was like, fuck this shit. I picked up the phone. I couldn't get hold of Rob. But by this point, I'd met a couple of other people, and I got hold of one of them. And he's like, yeah, come around. I said to mum and dad, I was like, oh, I got to stretch my legs. I'm going for a walk. I'll be back in a minute. Poor bastards. Like, it's so funny. Look, well, it's not funny, but it's strange looking back now how naive kind of they were and I was as well, in a way. It's interesting. But anyway, so I went round to his flat. And he was injecting, so he said, oh, I've got some clean works, do you want to bang up? I said, well, yeah, go on in. So he tied me off and off I went. And then that was it. I was off. That was really off to the races, I guess. Yeah, I was in a sort of position where I could afford it because I was working full time and my job allowed me to duck in and out of work, and I was living with my parents. I was paying basically no rent. And that was it, fucking bang. So for the next few months, I was just bang, but just at it like a fucking fiend. And then it wasn't long after this that my grandmother passed away. So my mum's mum. I didn't realize at the time, funnily enough, but she was one of the few people in the family that actually would have understood my predicament, shall we say, because she was an alcoholic, and she was also on morphine and codeine for a big chunk of her life, and she was an addict. Looking back, she was definitely an addict. I mean, she gave up the drinking, and then she had an accident, fell hip, and then the doctor gave her opiates. And because mum's sort of side of the family had a little bit more money, I guess, so much more middle class, and she was just that classic older middle class lady in the 90s. You know, the doctor just dosed her up on opiates, and they obviously filled a void for her because my granddad died quite young, so she was a widow quite young. And she was very agoraphobic as well. She barely left the house, so she'd just sit there drinking this Codis and taking her morphine pills. And I didn't realise that right until after she passed away. But it gave me a bit of a kick up the arse. Anyway, I went into my first outpatient pro. I totally leveled with mum and dad. You know, I said, look, I'm injecting heroin. I freaked out. You know, I was scared. So I went into an outpatient program, and I must have been 17, because I remember I had to go and see this guy because I was classed as a minor. So I saw a different therapist to the people. Anyway, yeah. So off I went, and I was put on. My first one was actually on buprenorphine. It wasn't methadone. So I cleaned up on I think it was like a 4-week taper, maybe, buprenorphine, and stayed clean for maybe a week after that. And then I got this fucking huge inheritance check. My grandmother had left me because my mum was her only child, and then me and my sister are the only grandkids, and it was obviously you know, we were quite a working class sort of upbringing, but like I say, on mum's side, one generation removed, there was a bit of money, and I got this fucking huge check in the post. And mum and dad, again, going back to that naivety thing, they like, well, he's all right now, he's just just been in therapy for a month, and he's fine. he's all good. I'd always wanted to go traveling, so this is how I managed to fund my traveling. I was like, I'm going to go traveling. I'm going to stay clean. I'm going to go traveling. So I went to Spain first. Did a bit of a trip around Spain, and I didn't really take drugs that much. I took some party drugs, and I was pissed most nights, I think. But that carried on, round and about, a bit of traveling in Europe and a bit in the UK. We used to do these sort of jolly boys outings, and me and a few mates would go to different cities for a long weekend. You would go to Brummyland or Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle, round and about, just sort of going around the nightclubs and the pubs and the theme parks or whatever. And it was good. It was good, but it literally took a matter of a couple of months for the hard drugs to really sneak back in again. And I think within, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 months, I had a habit again. But I was determined to go to New Zealand. Mum and Dad were booking a trip, and they'd arranged that I could go with them. We could all fly out on the same plane, and then we would basically spend a couple of weeks doing the family thing, and then they would go off and do their thing, and I'd go backpacking around New Zealand and maybe come back via Australia and spend a few weeks there. And this was the time before this happened again, and this is a couple of times I've done this with them when I was younger. This time was the first one, and I already had a habit again. I was like, fucking idiot, fucking habit again, fuck it. Private doctor. It's a private doctor in Rochester. He'd sell you a detox script, basically. He'd sell you 3 weeks, I think it was, worth of buprenorphine and 3 weeks worth of Valium. So you could just basically do a home detox. No questions asked. You just bought it. I think it was 240 quid or something. So I got that. I'm like, well, hold on. I might as well enjoy this trip as well. So I went to see these geezers who, at this point, I'll just a side note, while I was cleaning windows, I got back in touch with this fucking other junkie window cleaner maintenance guy, and he had these fucking contacts that were unreal. And he used to work for these guys, and he would run errands for them and drop things off. And pick things up, no questions asked. And I sort of joined in on that, and it was a good way to earn money. And these guys were like, I mean, they're not like fucking Pablo Escobar or anything, but they were certainly a couple steps up from the street dealers. And it was just a good little earner on the side, and you could be paid in cash or product. So normally there was a minimum these guys would sell. I think it was an ounce, I forget, but I said to them, because I've been working for them, I was like, look, the main guy was buying off on the street at the time, had been arrested, and he was trying to have a quiet period. So I went to these other guys. I said, look, come on, man, please, just as a one-off, sell us a fucking little bit, which I think it was like a quarter ounce, so it was like a quarter or something of smack heroin. So I got that, and I got a load of Zopiclone. I couldn't get any Valium. Oh, well, I had the Valium from the detox script, so I couldn't get any more, so I got some Zopiclone. So I've got them in the pill bottle, and then I got this smack, which I wrap up in a bloody bit of cling film, and then in a condom, and put it in the bank. This is the day before we fly out. I can't remember if I've told this story on Dopey. Stop me if I have. I don't know if this one made it through or not, but anyway, I can't. We're sitting at Heathrow Airport. Everything's good. The world's a happy place. I'm like, Mum and Dad have actually, these poor fucking people, they've actually paid again. This is the second time they've fucking done this. They paid to bump me up to business class so I could sit with them. So I'm getting ready to get on the plane, fucking drinking vodka tonics in the airport. The world's a happy. I'm going, right, I'm not fucking touching these drugs till we get to New Zealand. I'm not touching them. I'm not doing it, period. There was a 2-point stopover. We stopped in fucking Dubai, and then stopped in Sydney, Australia, then Auckland, New Zealand. Dubai was all right. I got drunk in the airport at the stopover, and then got back on the plane. And then by the time we're halfway between Dubai and Sydney, I was fucking, I was getting I mean, I was sick in Dubai, but I was not like, I was only yawning, itchy eyes, you know, I wasn't like full on fuck. But by the time we're halfway over the fucking Indian Ocean, I was crucified. I was sneezing and vomiting out my nose, and I was like, oh. So, fucking go to the toilet, go to the toilet. So I go to the toilet, pack a load of toilet paper down the little hole in the toilet, and like pop a squat and start fishing. And I get it out, and I rack up a line on the, you know, open it all up, rack up a line on the little vanity thing in the airplane toilet, and sniff this, because I didn't have the balls to take needles on planes yet. I did later, but I didn't at that point. So I sniffed this fucking, rack up this huge line, wrap stock. Oh yeah, fucking sweet. A fucking can of fucking like rum and coke with me as well. Oh, so it's not coming out my nose, and God knows anyway. So I'm sitting there, I wrap it back up. I bought another condom with me. I was ready so I could shove it back in. So I've shoved it in the condom, wrapped it all up. And it's a bit of a process, you know, in a plain toilet. And this gear starts to hit me. And like I'd literally just been on like a couple of 10 bags a day of like street gear for the last month. And this stuff was like, this weren't fucking like just street gear, you know. This hadn't been stepped on as much, and it started to hit me. I was like, oh fucking hell, I better get this fucking put away. So I sort of readjust myself, and it all starts to get a bit hazy here because I took some Valium as well. So I just remember sitting on the toilet, and I've got the condom with the gear in wrapped. And then the next thing that happens, the next thing that happens is a knock on the. I get what? Bang, 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 bang. Oh, fuck. Bang. How long are you going to be? Not long, not long. And I try and move, and I go and I've cramped. Right, my hand. I get these shooting pains. Right, this agony on my right hand, like from my finger to my elbow. Right, and I've gone out over with my forefinger of my right hand still up my ass. And then I've fallen sideways, and it's like bent my hand into like a position that it shouldn't be in. And so I use my other hand, pull it out. It's dead, like pins and needles, you know. So I like put it in the sink with my other hand, and I start washing it. I'm nearly done. Sorry, I was feeling sick. I'm not a good flyer, and you know, blah blah blah. So, but before any of this is probably the saddest thing. Before I did any of this, the first thing I did was got my other fucking finger and checked that the parcel was still there. I hadn't lost it down the toilet. But yeah, so that was that. I don't know how long I was there for. It can't have been more than 20 minutes because my parents would have come looking for me. But yeah, so that was that. And then got myself back together and waddled back out to the fucking seat and sat down and promptly slept for like 12 hours pretty much. I barely remember Sydney. And then we got New Zealand, and that was that. So that was the first traveling mission. After that, when the gear ran out, I used the buprenorphine and did the old detox, and then traveled around for a bit. And then as soon as I was back on home turf, straight back down the corners, straight back down the old places, and back to the window cleaning and back to the gear. And it was a pretty monotonous sort of year after that, really. It was just repeat, you know, that classic fucking monotony of every so often a new dealer will pop up, every so often something will happen. I'd made no attempts at recovery at all in that time period. It was all just yeah, a bit of a blur, really. But I remember the next time we went away was the time I ended up in Hong Kong. I've told that one a couple of times, but basically I went to go traveling again with mum and dad back to New Zealand, did the same thing, bought the detox script, bought some gear. and got on the plane. This time I went with my mate Rob, and he was as much of a fuck up as I was, and we made a ruckus on the plane, and we got arrested at Hong Kong, and we got our onward flights cancelled, and we were remanded in custody in jail in Hong Kong, and they took my buprenorphine off me. They binned it. They just took it, chucked it out. And I still had the gear up the bum, but again, but that was yeah. So we ended up in Hong Kong for it was about 7 or 8 weeks that time, and that's probably the most scared I've ever been, because we were remanded in custody for a few days in prison in Hong Kong, and that really fucked. That was probably the first. I mean, I know there'd sort of been consequences up to that point, but like that was the one that really scared me. And also, I had my dad was in New Zealand waiting to pick me up from the airport, and it was his 50th fucking birthday as well. That was why I was going to New Zealand to help him celebrate his 50th birthday, and he was there. He was in that airport for like 36 hours. No one would tell him anything. He's trying to call people. No one will tell him a dicky bird, and he's just. And so I've got like this double whammy. I mean, I'm in acute withdrawal, and I'm terrified that I'm going to get put in jail in Hong Kong for reckless public endangerment and criminal damage. That was the charges, because we'd broken the TV screen on the plane. And we were smoking cigarettes in the toilets on the plane as well. And they just really made an example out of us, and arrested us on the most severe charges they could relative to what we'd done, which was reckless public endangerment and criminal damage. So we're banged up in the cells in Hong Kong, and they shaved our heads and put all this lice powder on, and yeah, it was terrifying. And I thought this is it. This is how I'm going to go, you know. But in the end, they dropped the reckless public endangerment charges for the smoking in the toilet, and they just fined us for the criminal damage for the breaking the TV, and I can't remember what it was. Just basically the fine was pretty much the same as the bail money we'd paid, but they cancelled our flights onwards, and it was so expensive. It was so much money to try and get a flight on from Hong Kong to New Zealand, and then another one back to London after. So we ended up staying in Hong Kong and just partying out there. So we'll make the best of a bad situation. So I mean, all sorts of shit happened while we were there, but I think I've told most of those stories. But again, just came back, and then back to the grind. And then the next year was when my parents decided they wanted to move to New Zealand. They'd been there several times by this point. And Dad was, his building business in the UK got quite successful, and he wanted to wind down and semi-retire to New Zealand. They had friends there and extended family. So 2006, this would have been, they put all the paperwork in motion, and they asked if I wanted to come with them, like immigrate. I think at that point, though, I was too old to immigrate as a dependent. So but I didn't want to go to New Zealand then. I was just sort of getting started, really. I said no. Like, I started looking for flats to rent and this sort of thing, and there wasn't really anything came up. So in the end, I said to them, well, look, how about I come over with you for a few months? Because I knew there was a flat coming up available, but it weren't available till Christmas time. So again, I went over with them. This time, the doctor who I used to get the private scripts off, he was gone. He was no longer doing that. So this time I just clucked it out. I went over to New Zealand with him, and this was the first probably significant clean time I'd had in a good few years. The rattle was hell on the plane, and then in the hotel in New Zealand, but it was quite quick though. It didn't sort of the lethargy dragged. I remember that. The post-acute withdrawal dragged. That was, my legs ached for weeks, and I just had no energy. But I didn't last long. I think 2 months. I think I was here for, and I said, no, I got to go. But I was just so restless, and I just wasn't ready to even think about stopping. I still hadn't sort of come close to addressing any of the issues in my past, and of course by this point I'm just compounding them as well. I'm just adding to the pile. There was a couple of times when I was working for these Turkish guys in London, that I saw a couple of things that I really wish I hadn't, and so just violence and just nasty shit, and it's just feeding the fire, but not doing anything to actually help myself. Just in my head I'm going, well, it's all good, I just take drugs and it feels all good, so back I came into my mate's flat. His room was available. Literally the next day, I remember I went straight down London Bridge train station, phoned up a geezer that I knew there, bought some gear off him, and I went over. When I got home, I saved it. I didn't do it on the train. I remember I saved it, and I went to the chemist, to the needle exchange, and I remember I banged up a speedball in his living room, and I'd been clean for 2 months. And I woke up. This was literally, I was 24 fucking hours off the plane. And I woke up to him fucking slapping me and fucking pouring cups of cold water on my face. And it was just such a cunt, like, what place is my friend, and he wasn't a junkie. He wasn't an addict. And this is like, I've come back. He's like done me the favor of, letting me stay in his house, and the fucking 24 hours in the door, and he's having to bring me back to life, and it just didn't click. It just didn't. I mean, I apologized to him, but essentially it's empty words, isn't it? What the fuck does it mean? Oh, I'm sorry. It's fuck all. It's a load of bollocks. But so and then the grind sort of started. I back into the monotony, I guess. The next year was very much, doing carpentry work. I did upskill a little bit in that time. I got a qualification, but it was still just the same. It was still just bloody going to work to earn drug money, to come home and get obliterated. And then eventually something happened, and to be honest, I can't even remember what it was, but Dean, the guy I was living with, kicked me out. And rightly so. He should have done so long before. But it lasted that long. And I ended up moving in with a guy who I knew from the methadone clinic. And he had a big house. It was a family house. It was a council house, but it was big. And he had his sons a couple of days a week, and they were good lads. And Gary was an interesting character. He'd been injured. He was a mechanic by trade, and he'd been injured in a motorbike crash. He'd had his kneecap crushed, and he'd been on heavy pain meds for a long time, and then he'd ended up on the gear. And he was one of these guys who had his heart in the right place. He cared for his boys, and he cared. He wasn't a bad person, but he had been so long on the dole, so long injured, that his thing was just subconsciously using other people, so he didn't have to get up and do anything. It was worth his while letting me live there dirt cheap, because I was active, I was bringing him money, I was scoring for myself every day, so I'd score for him as well. Like, it was just a convenience, and he was a friend, don't get me wrong, but he had his own unique set of problems. And this started to go on again, and then I was back sort of working on and off for these guys, who moving product, doing favors while I was cleaning windows and doing maintenance work. And I had another crack at getting clean. By this point, I'd already done a couple of rehab stints. Back before Mum and Dad had moved, I'd done the Detox 5, the rapid opiate detox, where they knock you out for a week. put you in a semi-induced coma and flushed all the opiates out of your system. I'd done one private detox somewhere in North London. I forget what that one was. And I'd done one in Kent, Bridge House in Dartford. And then I'd gone down to their extended program. This was all in quite a short space of time as well. This was all in that last sort of year before Mum and Dad moved. And it just, everything had lasted like weeks maximum. I just wasn't listening, you know, it just wasn't happening. And then I had another go at getting clean. And this was an outpatient program, but it had regular sort of therapy sessions. And I did it again. I detoxed and stayed clean for a little bit. And then the contract that I was working for changed, and we got the contract to do a lot of remedial sort of carpentry fix-up work in this immediate area. So we're just going into people's houses and rehanging doors, fixing holes in the plasterboard in the wall, window seals, all the mundane shit. But part of the contract was for a home. Well, not a home. It was a block of bungalows that were for people. It was like a retirement home, but they were very independent. And there was just one nurse lived on site, and there was a panic button they could hit if they were in trouble. And the nurse would come, and obviously there was a doctor came, I think, there once a week, and blah blah blah. You get the idea. Anyway, so we're working doing these fix-up jobs, and then part of the deal, if you had one of these bungalows, was if you passed away, and you own the place outright, you had to give the company first refusal to buy it back. And this is what happened. This old girl died, and she her family lived in Spain, so they came back over. She owned it outright. She left it to them in the will. She phoned up the local company, and they subcontracted us. And they said, "Look, we want the place stripped. We've ordered a new kitchen, a new bathroom, install it, and everything else goes in the skip. We've taken everything of sentimental value. We're going to order a skip. This is your start date. Dump everything, install the new shit, and then that's that. Just have it done by this date." So off we go, and we're fucking ripping the kitchen out and installing all the new cabinets. It's like, yeah. So into it. I start on the bathroom, and this old bathroom, big bathroom vanity cabinet, and just shit in it, old bits of toilet, old half. She was a hoarder, she hoarded all these big boxes of the leftover nub of a bar of soap, all this sort of thing, and then right at the back there was an old shoebox, and it was a Hush Puppies shoebox, and really old, and I pulled it out, and in this fucking box was a load of first aid stuff, and just old plasters and bandages, but really old. And I looked in it, and at the bottom there were these bottles. Oh, they were glass as well, glass bottles, and there was about 130 milligram codeine phosphate tablets. There was about 50 10 milligram morphine sulfate tablets, and there was a pack, this little square bottle of fucking Diconol. I was like, oh my God, a fucking jackpot. I couldn't fucking believe it. So that was it. Bang, straight back on the train, at lightning speed as well. I remember phoning up this bird I knew, and that was the first thing I did. I had a bit of a party up with these drugs, and she brought around a load of white, and it was just straight back into the deep end. And then so again, back trudging along, and then I don't know. Nothing really changed. It was like Gary's legs started to get really bad, and I was actually having to take care of him quite a bit. He was really struggling, and we talked about getting back on a proper script. And I'd spoken to somebody. I can't remember who it was now. About this mob up in central London, and they were private, but they weren't ridiculously expensive, and they would do maintenance scripts, and we thought, well, like we tried so many times separately and together on this whole, the state-funded methadone program and blah blah blah, like so, or even the buprenorphine. It just never worked. And I mean, I didn't really think this was going to work, but the idea of a private doctor, to be honest, the thing that got me in the door was the fact that I knew I'd be able to get Valium. I knew like the private quacks in London at that time would just prescribe Valium, and it was easy, So I was like, oh. So we went up there, and they weren't unscrupulous. They were sort of quite caring outfit, really, for a private fucking addiction outfit, because they're not always the most scrupulous of institutions. But these guys were good. The counsellor there was really good, and this was the first time I actually sort of opened up to the idea of recovery, and I started going to NAE. I wasn't deadly serious about it. I didn't have a sponsor, but I started the process, and I actually did start to listen for the first time. And I was on quite a high dose of methadone, and they were prescribing me Valium as well. And I said, look, I want to taper off. I want to give this another go. And this coincided with the first time I'd spoken to my parents in a while. I mean, I'd been in touch with them, and I'd fucking burned them down for money. I'd phone them up once in a blue moon, and they, if I was between jobs and I was short of cash, and they'd Western Union me some money or something, and but they said, look, if you are serious, if you really want to get your shit together, you can come over to New Zealand, like properly. But you've got to be serious about it. I said, well, yeah, and I was in my head, and this, I sort of, it wasn't this exact conversation, but around this time, I broke down. I remember I told them what had happened to me when I was a kid about the sexual abuse and all this. And my mum just lost it, and she actually came back to the UK. And she, like, I'd never been to the police. I was always, because the sort of people I was involved with, it wasn't my nature. I'm not going, I'm not saying I was some big villain or anything, but I weren't going to the old bill. It just wasn't what I was going to do. I had a really bad month after that. It all came back because I'd finally told somebody just before Mum came back. And I was going to kill the guy. So I knew where he lived. He was down in Tunbridge Wells in Kent, and I knew where he lived. I was going to kill him. I took a load of cocaine, and I went to see the Jamaican boys, and I got a shooter off them. And that was the fucking plan. That was the big plan. I'm going to go around and blow his head off. But the whole process took so long. I'd sort of started to fucking come down and sober up a bit, and I was like, oh fuck, what are you doing? What are you fucking doing? So I went home and went to bed, and carried on the process, and I let mum call the police, and I spoke to the child protection unit, and the whole court case started, and off it went. And then I detoxed and came over to New Zealand, moved in with mum and dad. It was a slow sort of taper that time, and I mean, it was uncomfortable, but it wasn't terrible. And that was when the first time I really started working a proper program. I was clean and sober after that. I was working with my father. And then I got another job where I upskilled and finished my master joiners ticket qualification, and I met my now partner, and we were sort of together for about a year, and went to Australia. We moved to near Brisbane, and on the Gold Coast in Queensland in Australia, and got a job working for a company doing modular buildings, which then went out to the big mine sites in the desert. So I got to see all that. You know, it was a crazy time, and I was clean, like properly clean and sober. In the early days, I think I was still having a few beers in the pub with the boys on a Friday, but it was literally that. I was able to maintain that at that point. And then I even stopped doing that as well. And then we'd been together, at this point, my partner and I, Karina, we'd been together for about 2 years, 2.5 maybe. And we found out we had a child on the way. And this just fucking terrified me. Like, I freaked out. I shit myself. And I mean, I was happy. I mean, it was one of those, we had obviously the big conversation, you know, and we was like, well, let's give this a go. And then she came along. We moved back to New Zealand because both our families were there. Back to New Zealand we went, and but it opened up a whole lot of stuff for me. I don't really know why, but but it did. And we were living with her mum, Karina's mum. This was just before we bought our first house. We'd saved up a load of money in Australia, and we were going to put a deposit down the house, which we did. And then I was helping Karina's mum with some fencing work. She's got quite a big sort of property. It's like they call it a lifestyle block over here, where you've got she has horses and that sort of thing, and that's just what. So I was helping, but she's getting on a bit now. She's, you know, that's back then, late 60s, early 70s, and she's divorced, so she's up there by herself. So I did a load of work on the property for her. I was fixing this fence, and I belted my thumb with this hammer. I mean, really whack, like the nail just came straight off. It was just a whack. And she said, "Oh, go in there in the first aid kit. There's some plasters and that. Wrap it up." And I looked in the first aid kit, and she has a chronic condition, and she's prescribed morphine sulfate. And codeine with paracetamol as well. And I found them there, and I was just like, and yeah, that was that. So I pinched the load, and I totally justified it in my head. You know, I'm like, well, I need to finish the fence. You know, I need to finish the job. You know, so rather than just getting a plaster, I got a load of other stuff as well. And then that started the next run. This was around the time, like, we've just bought our first house. You know, we're renovating it. It was an old doer-upper house. Ruby, our daughter's 1 now by this point. And up until not long ago, you could still buy codeine over the counter here in New Zealand. So that becomes my routine. I go to the chemist 3 times a week and alternate round, you know, because you have to leave your address and name and number when you buy codeine, and that was it. Twice a day. It was sort of 150 milligrams of codeine flushed with beer or something to kick it off a little bit, you know. And this went on, and it was just this sort of double life scenario, really, you know. The house was finished, and we sold it because I got offered a job in a town called Taupo, where I now live, and it was a good offer, like really good offer. So we sold the house and bought one here in Taupo, and the whole time, I just got this double life going on. You know, I bought this new house and start this new job, which has various responsibilities of, you know, training apprentices and doing site measures for jobs that are worth, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars and that. And just this background routine again, just down the chemist 3 times a week, and down the off license, and just this kind of background, still trying to hide from everything. And this went on we're sort of renovating the house that we're in now, where I'm sitting now. And then the Christmas before last, I just broke down again. I mean, I just went out to the garage, and I nothing really prompted it, but like it was getting really hard to justify where this extra money was going. Like it wasn't heaps of money, but it was enough to have to hide, and it was just like everything was a lie. Everything was a deceit or a twisting of the truth or a alteration of a fact. There was so little that was like just straight up honest. And yeah, I remember I went in the garage. I just broke down. I just burst into tears. And I was just sitting there on the floor, and I just couldn't do it. I was like, what the fuck? So I came clean again. Came clean with my partner, and was just honest for the first. I just said, look, I've fucked up. I've gone back on the old ways, so to speak. I can't remember what I said, you know. And I mean, she wasn't happy. Don't get me wrong. She was fucking not happy. But she said, oh well, what can we do? And there is one opiate outpatient opiate treatment centre here in the central North Island, and I went to see them, and it took a few weeks to get the ball rolling, but I got on Suboxone through them, and then I haven't touched opiates again other than the Suboxone since then. In the early days, I was drinking too much, and the booze is a funny one for me. It's kind of like an on and off. Like, it is not my drug of choice by a long way. But I do find I have in the past and the recent past as well. You know, it's that old. I'd rather have something in my system that I don't like that much than have nothing at all in my system, if you know what I mean. Because over the COVID lockdown here, we just had one big lockdown in New Zealand, and then since then we've been very, very lucky. We've compared with the rest of the world, we've sort of weathered the storm quite well. We've got more freedom here and less COVID than a lot of countries. But on the first lockdown, like with everyone, no one knew how it was going to go. So I cut myself right. I started off on 16 milligrams of Suboxone, and I've knocked it down to 2 now. Well, I knocked it down to 2 milligrams pretty much when I've over that first lockdown, and I've just kind of maintained on that. And so I'll see how it goes from there. Basically just gotta not fall back into those habits of reaching for something, you know. Like I hurt my ankle, you know, recently, and I didn't. Yeah, I was good. I didn't go chasing the pain meds. I've had a couple of times where I've probably drunk a bit too much over the last few months, but I don't know. It's just that on and off thing, and that's why I'm trying now to actually, for the first time in a long time, really work a proper program. That's because I've finally accepted that much. At least I'm no shining light of sobriety, but I've realised I do really need to regularly replace my old habits with positive ones if I'm going to stand a chance, because my track record speaks for itself. Otherwise, you know, like there's just there's no denying what I am, shall we say, if you know what I mean. That sounds terrible, but you know what I mean. You can kid yourself up to a point, and then you get nearly 25 years down the line and you go, well, fucking hell, you know, 23 and a half of 25, pretty much I was on something, you know. There's not there's no denying it. But that's it really now. So I've started going once a week to the local AA meeting here. Unfortunately, there's only one a week in this town. in person. Luckily, we're still, you know, able to move around and do the in-person meetings, which is good. Try and leave the bloody booze alone, and just sit on my 2 milligrams for the next, I think, few months while the world sort of decides what's fucking happening, and I'll look at ditching that hopefully soon. I mean, I like the idea of being on nothing, you know. I mean, I'll ultimately 2 milligrams is still 2 milligrams, you know. It's still reliant on something, and I would like to get to a point where I'm not again, and I certainly plan to do so. But I've rushed it too many times before. So many times over the years, I've rushed it, and this time, like, I'm living a normal, productive life. You know, I'm a present father. I'm a present family member. I'm good at my job. You know, and while I certainly do plan to, knock that one on the head, I can't afford to rush it again, because every time I've done that before, it's bitten me in the ass. So yeah, watch this space. Few fucking cliches to finish on, one day at a time. Easy does it. That's me. I'm out. Thank you.